Can I ask directors to take their seats, please? Good afternoon, everyone. Just prior to getting the regular board meeting underway, we have a little event that we'd like to celebrate a little bit. We've got our friends from the Canadian Cancer Society who are coming to have a little ceremony with us and maybe a picture or two. And so what I would like to do is I would like to invite Mayor Staples, Director Marsh, and Director Stone to please come up to the front, and I'd like James Galt and his crew from the Canadian Cancer Society to please come up. Mike at some point. Oh, sorry. I forgot, the mayor isn't there, but we have the deputy mayor.
Can I stand by you?
Absolutely.
Can you sing it?
So the mic may not be able to pick it up,
okay.
but go ahead.
Ian, thank you for allowing us to come into the chambers, and thanks to the mayors. On behalf of the Canadian Cancer Society, we really appreciating your help in highlighting the Daffodil Month for the Canadian Cancer Society. During the month of April, we have canvassers throughout the community and people out in front of businesses collecting donations for valuable research and resources for people who are fighting cancer. We really appreciate your help in highlighting this. They're doing this nationally, so you're one of a small group of people that are highlighting this event for us. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll do a little bit of ceremonial pinning. I promise I will.
You don't want to jab me? Okay, well, thank you, I appreciate that.
You may. Yes.
So small.
Very much. Oh, great. And I'll leave some extra
I
pins.
think your colleague wants you to do me.
Oh,
He's afraid
does
to jab
he?
me.
Oh, he's afraid to jump.
I don't mind jabbing at the chair.
So fiddly. Oh, you're slow, James, too. All right.
One of your
So I'll leave a bag. If any of you would like a pin to wear throughout the month, that would be great, thank you. And we'll just have a little photo op.
Scooch in, everybody, come on.
Thank you so much.
Anytime.
touch me there, Aaron. We'll need dinner now. Usually dinner comes first.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just a quick note on this topic, I received this letter a couple of months ago and went to staff and did a little bit of research, and just so that everybody is aware, we do not make it a regular practice to support any number of organizations, but at the regional district, we do support two. It's the Canadian Cancer Society, and we have a little donation booth that we have at our front reception, and for Remembrance Day, the Poppy Funds. So of the work that we do, we allow two in this building, and I think they're worthy causes, and I want to thank my colleagues for participating in this, and we have daffodils to go around. So with that, next item is to just acknowledge that we are having this meeting today in the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. I would like to welcome to our board meeting alternate directors Harriet, Justice, and Sowry, and anybody? No, I think that's it. And turn your attention to the agenda for today. Mr. Barry.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have two changes to the agenda. The addition of new business 1, it's a staff report from Environmental Services Division called the National Disaster Mitigation Program Grants. That'll be NB1. And we can also delete CR3, that's your meeting that's currently in adjournment that we're going back to because we haven't finished that meeting, so there's no recommendations at this point.
Director Marsh.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry I didn't bring this up to you earlier, but I wondered if the board would be willing to have a moment of silence for the people that have suffered in the world just since we last were together. We did this at North Cowichan, the shootings at Utrecht, the Christchurch, and now the incredible flooding in Mozambique and Malawi, where almost 1 million people are without homes and without food. And I think it puts a big shining on the troubles of the world and what governments are needing to do to try and change it. So would you be willing if we just sat and?
I would turn to our corporate secretary and ask if we've generally considered motions like that from the table and if there's any thoughts on that. I don't see the harm in it, but being a kind of a process-oriented individual, it would have been nice to have had some notice. But do you
Yeah,
have any
sorry about
thoughts,
that.
Mr. Barry?
Mr. Chair, the board's free to do whatever they wish to do. If it's the will of the board, you should do that.
Looking around, we haven't adopted the agenda yet, so I would ask everyone who is so inclined to take a moment to think about those that have lost their lives in the past time since we met last. Thank you, everyone. Turn to the adoption of the agenda with the changes as mentioned. Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Salmon. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Turn to item 2. Mr. Barry.
That would be the adoption of the regular board meeting minutes of March the 13th.
Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Stone. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Mr. Barry, any business arising from the minutes?
No business arising?
Thank you. Go next to the report of the chairperson and,
Chair, the public input period.
oh, pardon me, did I skip right through that? My apologies. Now is the time for public input. Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to provide input to the board today on items on our agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. Mr. Chair, I watched your regional district meeting this morning and the meetings before, and it seems that the regional meeting has a lot to cover, and there was a lot this morning. And I felt that at many of these meetings where there's a regional and a board after, that things seem to be very rushed. And I wonder if this board would give consideration for rescheduling the board meeting for a later date or for later in the afternoon, say 2:30, 3 o'clock, if that would give them more time to finish the regional district meeting so that those subjects could possibly come to the board meeting. Right now, they won't make the board meeting because they haven't been, because the regional district meeting wasn't finished. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone else who would like to provide some input to the board today? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment on IN1. I was a little disappointed at the province's response to the UBCM resolution that Mr. Carruthers and I put together last year. Doesn't seem to go and solve any of the existing problems that are there, and I just hope that pressure can be continued to be put on the province and the three ministries that have commented on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to provide input to the board today? Looks like that's it, so thank you very much for your input today, and I guess we're now on to report of the chairperson. Some of you might have noticed myself and Mr. Carruthers were absent this morning. We had attended the 2019 Regional District Chair CAO Forum that was yesterday afternoon and this morning. I won't go into a thorough description of the items that were discussed, but it was regional district chairs and CAOs from across the province met in Victoria. Fairly ambitious agenda. There was a number of items. I think one that was of importance and is not yet resolved is some of the work around the Fire Safety Act and some requirements that may be imposed on regional districts to carry out various activities. So that's unresolved yet and still being discussed. There's was some discussion in the after the break yesterday afternoon in regards to a number of municipal affairs items, one of which was the discussion around alternate director roles, and a very interesting scenario in that it was brought forward by UBCM's executive. There's been discussion with the ministry. There's been an election in the intervening time since this was brought up, and the election has resolved a number of the items that were sticking points that created the discussion in the first place. So there's anticipated to be some further consultation around the province, but I think they heard again yesterday from not only myself but a couple of other chairs that the province would be better off to address specific issues, as in long-term absence of a director through to a medical condition or the likes, but not the need to have a general review of the entire electoral or alternate director format, and it came up again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So there'll probably be more to come on that front. Some other discussion, myself and Mr. Carruthers and Mike Pearson from the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure did a panel discussion on active transportation, which was, I think, very well received. We have some opportunities here, and there was an announcement, was it Gabriola Island is going to be having a pilot project to look at connecting communities and some initiatives where some of the work that we'd like to see happen in our area, they are going to test on Gabriola Island, and it looks like the ministry is moving towards a set of regulations that will not only apply here, it has to be a set of regulations that they can develop for the whole province. So it looks like they're moving forward, so I was very pleased to hear from the ministry on that front. And this morning, a number of items, solid waste and recycling was brought up, which it's clear that this regional district is in pretty good shape in comparison to a number of our colleagues across the province. Our proximity is a good thing, and our relationship with the other regional districts and the work that's done through AVICC and their solid waste task force is showing that we're showing some leadership on that. And I think that's about all I've got to report on that, and I've looking to follow up on a couple of items. If anybody has any interest in those things that I've discussed or would like to see the agenda, please come and see me afterwards. And the second item, and this is kind of a neat thing, we get to talk about a lot of different things around this board table. And one of the things that I think it's important is for us to acknowledge and sing the praises of good things that happen when they do. And I just received this before I went to Victoria, And we've got a staff member I'd like to recognize, but before I call her up, this is a certificate from the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada. And the letter addressed to Mr. Carruthers reads as follows. We are pleased to notify you that your annual financial report for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2017 qualifies for a Canadian Award for Financial Reporting. It looks like a CANFR. The Canadian Award for Financial Reporting recognizes excellence in governmental accounting and financial reporting and represents a significant accomplishment by a municipal government and its management. When a Canadian Award for Financial Reporting is awarded to a government, a Canadian Award for Financial Reporting Achievement is also presented to the individuals or department designated by the government as primarily responsible for having earned the CANFR. Accordingly, an award for financial reporting achievement will go to the Corporate Services Department of the Cowichan Valley Regional District. And there's a little bit more in here, but with that, I would like to call up Natalie Wayner to come and receive this award on behalf of the Government Finance Officers. So here you go. Maybe we should turn it around for the camera. Got it. Right on. Congratulations. Good news. I think that it's good to know that we've got solid people doing great work behind the scenes. It's not very often we get to call finance up here to receive awards, and I think that's a hard one and well-deserved award. So with that, I'd like to go to the next item on the agenda, which will be number 7, correspondence, and we have correspondence from Cowichan Intercultural Association. Mr. Berry.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In the Cowichan Intercultural Society, they are requesting a letter of support from the board. They provide settlement services in our region through an agreement with the Government of Canada, and they are responding to the government's call for proposals.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that we write that letter of support.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Stone. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Director Marsh, could you turn off your microphone, please? Number 9, Mr. Berry.
Actually, number 8, Mr. Chair.
Number 8.
Information item, correspondence from UBCM regarding the provincial response to the 2018 resolutions that the board had submitted.
So everybody's had an opportunity to read it, I'm sure. Is there any discussion on this particular item? It's an information item. We've already had an individual from the audience express some sadness around this. Director Stone.
I just think I'd be remiss not to also express my disappointment in the response from the government on this. I think we've seen all too well some of the impacts these have when these decisions are made inside a bubble and not with the considerations of the people and the governments that are most directly affected. But thank you for Mr. Davis for making those comments at the beginning of our meeting.
Thank you, Director Stone. Anyone else? Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I share the concerns of Mr. Davis and Director Stone, and I wonder if, aside from UBCM, if we want to respond to the government. And, you know, we're still dealing with the soils bylaw. We've still got contaminated soil in our Shawnigan watershed, and, you know, there's nothing to prevent us as a board from saying directly that we're disappointed in how it's affected us. So I'd like to make that motion.
So perhaps a little bit more clarity. Are you asking that the chair write a letter expressing her disappointment, or are you looking for something more wholesome and more
I was
action-oriented?
thinking of something a little more wholesome, like just saying we're disappointed and why, given the challenges that we've had in the watershed.
Mr. Berry.
Perhaps, Mr. Chair, just so we're not wordsmithing something just off the top of our heads here, why don't we bring it back as unfinished business at the next board meeting?
Sounds great. Good.
Do you need a resolution to that effect? Mr. Berry,
We don't, but
would you like a resolution to that effect?
sure.
Moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, that motion carries. Now we're on number 9.
Now we're on number 9, Mr. Chair, which would happen to be the report and recommendations of the Island Savings Center Commission meeting of March the 14th.
Who's going to be reading that recommendation? Since Director Sebring isn't, who's the vice chair of that organization? Generally, we have a director on the board read the resolution, so I think I'm gonna turn to Director Yanni DiNardo and ask her to read the resolution, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report and recommendation of the Island Savings Commission meeting of March 14th, 2019. The recommendation is that the Island Savings Center revert to its original name of Cowichan Community Center effective immediately. So moved.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Marcotte. Any discussion on this item? Director Stone.
And I appreciate the autonomy and the recommendation from the commission. However, before we jump to just go back to the old name, I had a thought, at least in our agenda review, that we might consider consulting with Cowichan tribes and coming up with a new name that would more reflect the cultural diversity of our communities. So I appreciate the desire to go back to something maybe recognizable, but I just thought maybe we could be a little bit more creative if we're going to be spending money to rebrand the center and remove the Island Savings monikers from it, that we could be a little bit more thoughtful and creative with what the name would be. You know, to my mind came up Kawatsan Community Center, but there might be confusion with the cultural center, but I think some consultation might be warranted.
Director McGonigal.
Thank you. I agree with Director Stone on the premature nature of this recommendation. It came from the commission, and it is ultimately the decision of the board to endorse or either look at other options. At the agendas meeting that we spoke to, there was some discussion about not only collaborating, but seeking some advice from our friends at Cowichan Tribes on the possibility of renaming of that facility. So I would certainly not endorse this personally. I would like to look at other options first.
Mr. Berry, would it be appropriate for a motion to refer this back to the commission to consider some of the discussion around the table today?
If that's what the board wishes to do, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Director Staples, seconded by Director Stone. It is a referral motion, so on the propriety of referral, is it on the propriety of referral? Go to Director Marsh.
I guess I am concerned that if we're feeling like this, can we speak to referral, not why I don't want to?
It's only, we have a motion to refer, it's not a debatable motion.
So I don't
It's-
say why.
If you, exactly, it's,
Okay.
you're not debating the merits of the motion. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like maybe we could hear from somebody on the commission to hear what was discussed. Like we're kind of lacking
That's
some
not-
information here. Jumping to conclusion a little bit, no?
That's not on the propriety of referral. We've had a motion to refer it back. It's our prerogative to act on the recommendation which has come forward from the commission. It doesn't look, from my read around the table, that we're prepared to endorse this recommendation at this point, so we have a motion to refer it back to them to consider some of what's been discussed at this point. We've got some representation from this board that sits on this commission, and I think can bring back some of those concerns. Any further discussion on the propriety of referral? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? We have Director Kuhn opposed. That motion carries. Director Yanni DiNardo, CR2. Mr. Barron? What meeting is this for? Oh, go ahead, Director Yanni DiNardo.
This is a report and recommendation of Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of March 20th. Recommendation 1 through 4. 1, the certificate of sufficiency confirming the sufficient petitions requesting inclusion to the Lake Cowichan Fire Protection Service Area be received. 2, that the CVRD Board number 1657, Lake Cowichan Fire Protection Service Establishment Bylaw number 1994 be amended to include properties described as PID 001-2120-044, Block 14, District of Cowichan Lake, and Lock B, Block 48, District of Cowichan Lake, Plan Number VIP 24356, and PID 015979946, Lot 1, Block 48, District of Cowichan Lake, Plan Number VIP 4962.
Can you stop there?
Yes, I see that. I
Move that item?
Yeah.
Seconded by Director Stone. This is for all directors. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, that motion carries.
Thank you.
Carry
For
on.
electoral area directors only. It's 2, the CVRD bylaw number 4278, electoral area D, Cowichan Bay Official Community Plan Amendment. First and second reading, and 2, that the CVRD bylaw 4272, electoral area D, Cowichan Bay Upland Zoning Amendment bylaw 4831, Trans-Canada Highway, receive first and second reading.
Hang on, Director Yanni DiNardo.
Yes, and I would recommend that you do not make that as a motion, because in effect, you're giving the bylaws 2 readings right now. That's for your information at this point. Bylaws will be given those readings. They have to be on the agenda. And I don't see those 2 bylaws on the agenda later today, so you can't
Give us a
pass
path forward, please.
that they be forwarded to the board for consideration of first and second reading
So move that.
for 1 and 2.
You're gonna have to clarify for me,
Yeah,
Mr. Barry.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if you look at the reading there, it says that bylaw 4271 receive first and second reading. In effect, you're giving first and second reading
Right.
to the bylaw right now. The bylaws are not on the agenda. That wording should not be like that.
Correct?
So what can be done is, let's refer this to the next board meeting. Because the bylaws are not on this agenda, and you can't schedule a public hearing until the
Bylaws have been read.
receive first 2 readings.
Motion to refer this to
Well,
the next.
this is a problem with applicants to be put off again. Is there no way to rectify it here today?
Not now.
Because the applications, we're struggling with applications being put off and not being moved along, and this would.
Director Yanni DiNardo, our corporate officer,
Okay.
saying there's nothing we can do about that now. So, do you need a motion to refer this to the next board
Yes.
meeting? We have a motion to refer this to the next board meeting, please. Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Marcotte. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries.
Mr. Chair, if I can here, through to Director Yanni DiNardo. Item 3 here is a little different than normal. What you're about to consider, and this is for all the board, you're going to consider here notice against land title that building regulations have been contravened. You cannot consider this motion until after the appropriate steps have been taken. That's why I've jumped in here. And I've set them out on the agenda for you here. We have to hear an overview by the building inspector first, and then the property owner who is in attendance, he has an opportunity to be heard. You will then consider what you've just heard, and there's a recommendation from the committee, but you have to hear from these two people first.
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no presentation. However, the specific details and history are in your staff report. The subject property is located at Shawnigan Lake Road at 1812. There was an existing legal non-conforming deck that was dismantled and rebuilt with a new, larger structure. There's some pictures in the package that are dated approximately 2007 from before, and then in 2012, there's an aftershot of what was built. This work was completed without permit and was in violation of the building bylaw. The owner was notified at the time and given the opportunity to bring the property into compliance, but he failed to do so. This property has since changed ownership, and the new owner is present here. And in closing, I just recommend that notice on title be placed to protect future owners for the information and let them know there is an infraction against the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Hang on. Do we have any questions for staff? Director Marsh, this is an electoral area item. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, thank you very much. And could we have the applicant or the owner come forward, please?
Hi, I'm the current owner of 1812 Shawnigan Lake. Sorry, this might be a little bit of a repeat for people that were here last week, but so I did purchase the property in September 2017. I did due diligence by contacting the CBRD, looking at the building file and the bylaw file, and it was told to me that there was nothing in the file. And the reason for this was, I guess the file was on the inspector's desk. So without any info in the file, I didn't see any need to get proof that there was nothing existing. And the summer after, I was then notified that this file was started in approximately 2011 or 12. So a significant time had gone on, and I wasn't told about it when I contacted the CBRD. And in talking to the previous owner, he is making the claim to me that he didn't rebuild the deck, he just repaired sections of the deck that were rotten, and I've been unable to find any proof to the contrary. So I guess this is definitely an extenuating circumstance in my eyes. It's not like I did the work, even if you do take the side of the CBRD that this is a brand new deck in around 2007 or 8. It wasn't myself that did it, and in my eyes, the purpose of the bylaws should be safety, number one, and I've got no issue with conforming to safety on the property. If I asked Ian McDonald if he could come out and just make sure it is safe, there's a few hoops to jump through because the majority of the deck is actually on Timber West land, and I only own about 6 inches of it. So it's definitely a bit tricky. There's no way that Timber West is going to give me permission to trespass because it opens them up to liability. And I mean, I've got no issue with something at the CBRD saying that there's a bylaw infraction to notify future purchasers. But what I do have an issue with is a notice on title that can affect lending. Because when this, my mortgage runs up, it's going to affect myself for being able to requalify for the mortgage even though I already own it. And also it affects the property value in the future. If I do decide to sell it, nobody's going to be able to mortgage this property until that is cleared up, and it is essentially impossible to have this conform without ripping it down, which would also significantly affect the value of the property. So it's a little bit from me. Any questions?
See no questions from the committee, so thank you very much, and I would turn to Mr. Barry. Next order in the process would be to consider the resolution that is before us.
Mr. Chair, there is a recommendation from the committee, but you have just heard from Mr. O'Neill and Mr. McDonald, so.
And I do have one more thing. I would argue that if this is passed, in my eyes, I would argue that the CVRD is definitely responsible for my damages. Just in saying that I did contact the CVRD, I was told there was nothing, and it's not like it was a few weeks before the infraction was. This is 2012, and I bought it in 2017. That's a significant period of time for a file to be on somebody's desk. So I would just ask your guys' forgiveness to bend the rules a little bit in this circumstance. So that's for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Turn to the director for the area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's unfortunate for the landowner's situation, but I think proceeding, we have to do it, put it as land title, and the future will hold what will happen with that file.
Do we need this resolution read into the record?
Yes, we do.
Would you
I'll-
read
I'll-
it, or
I'll-
shall Director
I'll read
Yanni
it.
Dinner?
I'll
Okay.
read the recommendation that pursuant to Community Charter, Section 57, a notice against land title be registered for 1812 Shawnigan Lake Road, legally described as, and the legal description is in the rest of the recommendation in front of you.
Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director, are you seconding the motion, Director Smith? Moved and duly seconded. Any discussion on this item? Director Salmon?
I'm just wondering on the issue of the delay, is there any comments or policy on that? Is there a time limit on these sort of things, or do we have any response to that?
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Director Salmon, I'm not entirely sure what is meant by a time limit on these kinds of things. I'm not sure if it's in reference to how long the file was alleged to sit on a staff person's desk, or quite what. So if I could just ask for a bit more clarity.
Well, I think the owner made a good point about the delay and past owners. I just thought maybe there was some sort of best practice on this kind of issue.
I see.
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. Through you to Director Salmon. Perhaps there is a best practice. Certainly I can suggest from a staff perspective, matters of this nature are brought forward as expeditiously as possible. Of course, that reflects balancing workload and so forth, but these kinds of issues are typically deemed as time sensitive, and staff respond to them as quickly as they can.
Second follow-up?
So just, I'm thinking if there's some, if at some point there's sort of an undue burden on the owner, and I wasn't aware actually of the mortgage renewal factor. I don't know if anyone can confirm, is that always the case, that your mortgage can't be renewed if there's a charge like this on title, or?
So I'm a little challenged in that the part of the reason why we had some discussion in advance of entertaining the motion was a lot of this opportunity was held at committee, and I would have hoped that we asked this question in advance of having the resolution on the floor, because I was hoping we would have questions as pertaining to the resolution and the notice of title, and not further explanation as to the details that what got us to here. I don't know if there's a staff person that wants to. Nope, it's sort of beyond the scope, not information presented by staff. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel comfortable moving the motion. My own property does have something on title as well. And it's just a place marker for future, whether it, and you can apply to have a title removed, is my understanding as well, so.
No comments now, we've got a motion on the
So
floor.
I'd like to move the motion.
I believe it's been moved and seconded, and I'm looked for she's asked the question to be called. I don't see any other hands. I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Are there any opposed? We have one opposed, Director Salmon opposed. The motion carries. Mr. Berry, next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We deleted item CR3 when we adopted the agenda, so we will move on to the bylaws section. And in front of you, you have bylaw 4190, Cowichan Bay Sewer System Amendment Bylaw for adoption.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? There's none opposed, the motion carries.
And the next bylaw for electoral area directors only, bylaw 4262, Board of Variance Establishment Bylaw, first three readings.
Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed, the motion carries. Mr. Berry, next item, unfinished business?
Unfinished business, you'll recall,
Wait a
Mr.
minute.
Chair.
Is that first three and adopted?
Yep.
Okay.
You'll recall at the last meeting, Director Nicholson came forward with a notice of motion, and the item is to be dealt with now.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So several weeks ago, we had a somewhat memorable day of meetings. You may recall February 27th, Director Services was followed by Regional Services, the Hospital Board, and board meetings. And I thought that that day provided a notable opportunity to reflect on how we might think about improving the meeting process so that we show a lot more clearly our respect for people's time and input. And you know, it was a really difficult day to manage, and I really commend the various chairs that stepped up to the task that day. And I have a specific motion I'd like to make about the public input period. But before I do, though, I'd hope you indulge me in a couple of suggestions, other suggestions I have about organizing and managing our meetings that I would like those who do that to consider. So first, regarding delegations, I think that delegations make our meetings much more colorful and interesting and educational. And some delegations are not time sensitive and provide more of a general update about activities going on in the community. Others are issue specific and are certainly most useful when they coincide with items on the immediate agenda. So I think we need to make sure we have the time to devote our full attention to each delegation. So I'm hoping for more thoughtful scheduling. I didn't think we did a very good job that day. The second suggestion is about welcoming. If you're a rookie to local government meetings, it takes time to figure out what's going on, particularly in terms of who is who, protocols, and process. I think we should dedicate some thought to how we can make our meetings more welcoming and less daunting for the public, how we can be a better host, and on the odd days when we have many people attend, we can be more accommodating and appreciative. That leads into the motion I'm making related to the public input period that I would like to speak to. So I'll make the motion, and if I could speak to that, I'd like to. I move that the public input period procedure policy be amended by replacing the words unanimous vote with the words majority vote at the end of the sentence under item number 1.
Are you seconding that item? Discussion. Go ahead, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. We started a public input period, I think it was less than a year ago maybe, in an effort to ensure the public had an opportunity to provide input on specific agenda items before a decision was made. I thought that was a great idea, and I think it's worked very well. And people do take time out of their days to come to our meetings, and sometimes they travel quite a distance, which adds even more time. And usually 1 or 2 people actually stand up and speak at a meeting, and I find their viewpoints really valuable. And I think it's a measure of public engagement we should probably track. if we're interested in public engagement, which I am. Anyway, we allocate 15 minutes with, I believe, up to 3 minutes per speaker. So all going well, at least 5 people have an opportunity to speak. Occasionally, as we experienced February 27th, many people attended interested in a couple of specific agenda items. And I really believe if people, members of the public, make the effort to reach out to us, I would like to ensure that we are reasonably accommodating. And I think this motion will help ensure we're perceived as welcoming of input.
Director Kuhn.
I'm going to be opposed to this motion. What happened when we had that meeting and there was a whole lineup of people who wanted to speak, basically they were trying, by having that many people present, they were trying to kind of, I wouldn't say hijack the meeting, but they were trying to slant the board toward a certain outcome. Now, that can happen now and then, and I mean, we get pressure from all kinds of sides. But the purpose of that many meeting talking, that's actually what should happen at a public hearing. And so I was totally opposed to having that many people come forward, giving us their opinion about why we should go this way or why we should go that way. We had all the facts. We had, I don't know, was it 75 letters that we received or emails? I read them all. We had all the information. There was no need on going through all that verbally again, just to press home the point by some of the people that we should offer a motion in a certain way. So the public input period is a relatively short period. It should allow people to come forward with some remarks, but it shouldn't be a whole throng of people that come in and offer their opinions and try to slant the board. I'm just totally against that. That's what we have public hearings for. And I guess the effort by some of these people was to prevent the public hearing, because they didn't want that. They wanted to have their opinion before the board came to a decision. And I'm just opposed to that. And I, quite frankly, some of the directors on the board came afterwards to me and congratulated me that I had the guts to actually raise my hand. And so I think the way the system is set up is just fine. I wouldn't be willing to make a change to that.
Thank you, Director Acton.
Thank you. I appreciate the motion, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be voting for it today. If we're going to start getting that detailed on policy, perhaps we should look at the whole thing. Even the 3 minutes is quite long, and people come with a huge speech, and they could get their point across in a shorter amount of time when there's less people. And then if we're going to start talking about that, I would really like to talk about our Wednesday meetings. Ever since this new board, they are just getting longer and longer and longer, and fair enough, and we have more and more and more, but I think we need to find a solution to make these meetings shorter. These days are way too long for one person, and I don't think we're making always good decisions by the end of the day, even by sitting for, after a couple hours. So I'd like, if we're gonna do anything, I would like to just review perhaps a bunch of items of how we do business around here.
Thank you, Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about policy. Are there any other policies the board can waive if only one person is opposed to them? Like, could this happen to any other policy? I didn't frame that right, but
Mr. Bear.
Mr. Chair, what
you know what I'm trying to say.
jumps to the top of my mind is when we have a delegation, and by bylaw, it states they have 10 minutes.
Right.
And that can be extended with a unanimous vote.
Only with unanimous vote.
Yeah. So if a delegation was rambling on and one director had heard enough, if a motion came forward to extend, one director could end the conversation. Off the top
What
of my head.
about another kind of policy, though?
I don't have them in front of me, so I can't.
Yeah, so most of our policies, if all of the board wanted us to stick with them, or, like, I guess my point is, I think, I support Director Nicholson's motion. I heard what Director Kuhn said, and I think that perhaps that could be dealt with by the chair saying, after maybe it's extended into 10, 15 minutes, and it looks like it's the same stuff being said, and it's really more appropriate for a public hearing, the chair could then say, you know, excuse me, but with the board's permission, I think that this is better saved for a public hearing. Because we don't know who might have been sitting in that. Like, I was a bit embarrassed that day myself, because I thought, there's a lot of people here. I made the assumption, and I've always learned that when I make assumptions, it's, well, I won't say the crass thing that they say about assuming, but I'm almost always wrong, not completely right. And I assumed that all of those people were here for the Cowichan Bay issue. And then I realized that there was a lot of people here about the cannabis issue, which meant that one issue that people came for ended up being heard, and the other one didn't, which might have been appropriate that time. But what if there was a person or two in there that wanted to speak on something else, and they came all the way here? Do you see what I'm saying? So I just think that a majority, or maybe even 2/3 of the board, would be more appropriate than allowing one director to have that power when we are saying, as a board, we want the community to communicate more with us. And I can think of an example of a board I've sat on recently where there was a director that was, or it wasn't a director, a person, a member, that was often contrary to the majority of the other people sitting at the board. And if they had that much power, there's some business that may not have taken place. So I think it's nothing personal about Director Kuhn. It could have been any one of us. But I think if you're going to have a public input period, there are times when it's wise to be flexible. And so I'll just leave you with one example. North Cowichan had totally led by the public concern about our forests and our forestry practices. And when we had a motion on at our committee of the whole, we actually we knew it was going to be big. And I know this is different. I don't want to say that this is apples and apples, because I know there was a public hearing for this particular thing that we're talking about on the 27th. But we chose to have a day where we let people talk for as long as they wanted, and that they had their 3 minutes, and if it was 100 people. And I believe that it created a more cooperative and trusting relationship going forward. So if you take aside that, and I agree, and I understand the frustration of the people who have to deal with the public hearing. That's not the reason I'm saying this. I know that's the reason that's been given, but I do believe that it's not really in keeping with what we're saying if we allow 1 out of 15 people to stop people from having input. We could set the limit to another 15 minutes, or we could do, you know, but I think we need to be a little bit more flexible and not allow less than a majority to change that.
Okay, I have a speakers list, and I would ask that we keep to the resolution that's on the floor, if we could. We're not here to debate one another. We're here to discuss the resolution on the floor. I have Director Stone next.
Wow, one little simple thing, and I've got a lot of things to say about it. I'm just going to make it quick, though. Meeting of the board is held in public, not with the public. That's the principle of good governance. That doesn't mean we shouldn't listen, and we always should, but I would also go that, you know, we talk about last-minute resolutions affecting policy or adopting policy at the last minute. Last-minute input on important decisions that are on the agenda for that day is frankly something I actually don't agree with. It causes people to change their minds at last minute with incomplete information and not research the input that you're given right before you consider an item. So if there's a willingness to hear from the public and you feel like you've been told something that's new, it should really be referred to a future meeting so that you can look into those items and make sure you're making good policy decisions. In some cases, the public input is extremely repetitive. We've actually had an incident here where people just lined up at the microphone and said, no, 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 one after the another. And I don't think it actually does add to the public discourse in many cases, or is conducive to good decision-making or policy. When it comes to land use should be done at public hearing. That was a pseudo-public hearing on 2 different land use items, and I think it was one of them was a specific effort to prevent a potential bylaw from even going to public hearing, and I think that is actually an abusive process. And policy reviews, in the case of this specific motion, should be done on a broader and more thoughtful basis, not on a one-off issue. Changing policy based on one incident is the definition of bad policy making. So if there's a desire to look at the policy based on some of the experiences that we have, I think it needs to be done more thoughtfully. And I don't disagree with the thought, at least the prospect that, hey, a single member is not the will of the board. So, you know, maybe I would be more comfortable with a 2/3 majority, or even a majority vote to extend it. But when you look at the thrust behind it, when we made the policy, it was in reflection of our delegations policy. We were treating the public input period as a delegation of citizens that didn't have to make a scheduled appointment. They didn't have to submit their things in advance so that we could review the materials and consider what was coming forward. And we don't allow our board to make decisions based on delegations as a policy in itself. So then we have people coming to items on the agenda, giving last-minute input, and then giving them either A, the expectation that we'll listen to them, which is the expectation that's set, but how does that reflect on good policy when we have a policy that says we won't make decisions based on a delegation that gives us significantly more information in advance? So I might seem a little riled up by it, but I just think that, you know, what I'm hearing around the table is diving into the worst principles of governance. And if we want to do policy at the right level, this is a broader discussion that we should have around public input, and really take a step back out of a specific incident and do a little bit better reflection on policy making. So I'm willing to have that discussion, absolutely support it, but I won't be supporting this motion.
Director Stone, Director Smith.
Thank you. I also will not be supporting this motion. I feel that the policy has been put in place. It obviously was created with a lot of thought and intent when it was created, and I agree with Director Stone. One of the things I'd like to point out is there was these were electoral area committee, and people had come already to that meeting and had public input at that time. So for some of the things, repetitiveness may not be the answer for us to hear it when people come to public input. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. I've got Director Kuhn on the list, but Director McGonigal and myself haven't spoken, so I'll come back to you, Director Kuhn. Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much. I respect the intent of the motion, and I think reflection on the policy is an avenue that I would appreciate rather than make a decision on a resolution today. I think reflecting on the intent of the public input process through a future meeting, and policies are made to be changed. If we reflect on the past year of the public input, what are the pros and cons of that process on policy and procedure? And moving forward, I agree with the intent that one person should not negate the wish of the whole board. I would be more comfortable with a 2/3 majority as others have spoken to. But I think a further discussion on the reflection of how it worked, if it works, what needs fixed is more of a productive process in my opinion.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. I've got myself, Kuhn, and Stone, and just in discussion with Mr. Barry, perhaps if there's some desire for some further discussion. Got Director Staples on there too. That this could be referred to a corporate services meeting for further discussion. And I'm just going to make mention of, you know, a lot of preparation went into that meeting. And there was a lot of communication in regards to how that meeting would go. And I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of details, but I think some of it has already been mentioned, that there were maybe some outcomes that people were looking for that were other than just to provide input to us. And, you know, I'm reluctant, because I think process is very often our friend and helps us to steer clear of trouble. And you know, we had that provision that we could have extended. The extension wasn't granted by the single vote of one of the members around this table, and we move on. And there's good reasons have gone into developing that policy. And, you know, I'm not going to, because of an incident, change that policy. I've been here 10 years, and I've seen the unanimous consent not given in about 3 cases. And people have gone and thanked the director for putting up their hand afterwards. So it happens so rarely. It's helped us in the past, and I'm reluctant to, on the basis of a reaction to a circumstance, to change the policy. So with that, I'll go to Director Staples, followed by Kuhn and Stone. Director Staples.
So is this when I could actually make a motion to refer? Because I feel like we're going to keep going around the table, and I think it's been said a number of times now that if we want to look at this, we need to look at the policy. And so if I can make a motion to refer to, is it corporate services, to have a discussion about the overall policy.
It's been moved and seconded on the propriety of referral. Propriety of referral. We're not discussing the matter any further. You can ask for advice from Mr. Barry.
With that, would staff give us a little bit of some insight maybe onto some suggestions based on their observation? That was the only request, that we have a little bit of something to work with at corporate services.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through to Director Stone, I would come forward, obviously, with the current policy, but some other things that you may wish to consider. I actually heard a really good comment earlier, where really quickly, some people who wish to speak on a different subject didn't have that opportunity. So during the public input period, perhaps having a limit. We'll listen to the people for this subject, another subject, and another, so that everybody could.
I think that's for discussion at the
Exactly,
next meeting, not for today, so.
That's the type of stuff that you could.
Staff will bring information forward. Any further discussion on the propriety of referral?
Just for how staff will approach this, could we also discuss at the same time the lengthiness of our meetings on Wednesdays? And
I think
would
that's
that
a
be
separate item, but we
topic?
can bring it forward with the next chair's review on how we might address some of the lengthiness
Okay.
of the meetings. Seeing no other hands in the air on the motion to refer to corporate services, this item. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Mr. Berry, next item would be NB1.
NB1, the new business item in front of you from the Environmental Services Division, and the subject is National Disaster Mitigation Program grants. And since it's a staff report, I'll read, there's a recommendation with 3 parts. Number 1, that the contribution agreement with Emergency Management BC for project, there's a project number there, be executed. Number 2, that the contribution agreement with Emergency Management BC for project, a separate number, be executed. And number 3, that the 2019 budget for Function 131 Environmental Initiatives be amended to increase federal conditional grants revenue by $225,000, increase provincial conditional grants revenue by $225,000, and 3, increase floodplain management expense $450,000.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. That motion carries. Next, Mr. Berry.
Would be question period.
Is there anybody in the gallery have any questions for the chair today?
Mr. Chair, I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. Mr. Chair, on the unfinished business for public period, I would too like to see some changes, and one that when you see this place full of people, you know that something's not right.
Do you have a question, Mr. Evans?
Yes, I do. Mr. Chair, on your regional meetings in the morning, you take some of those things that have happened there, the reports, and you put them into the board meeting in the afternoon, and the public doesn't get a chance to have a look at it, digest it. I find that the regional meeting is very interesting, but can we have, as Director Acton asked for, more time to think about things so you can make good decisions? I think that when things are rushed, I think that we're all losers, the public, the directors, and especially the public in their taxes. Could you please take more time for your meetings? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone else in the gallery that has any questions for the chair today? Seeing none, motion to resolve into closed session under Mr. Barry.
Closed session board minutes, March.
Mike?
Thank you. And closed session board minutes of March 13, and then we're going in for closed session at the same time. Information that is prohibited from disclosure under Section 21 of the Freedom of Protection and Privacy Act. We're also going to consider appointments to the Saltair Gulf Islands Community Parks Advisory Commission.
We have a motion to resolve into closed. Did I see a hand up? Moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director Marcotte. All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries, and we'll come back at 2:45. Take a few minutes.
Like 5-7 minutes? Can we have 10 minutes at least?
It's 8 minutes.